The trouble began on a warm Saturday morning, the kind of morning when the neighborhood seemed almost unnaturally peaceful. The sun rose slowly, lighting the rows of manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, and identical houses that lined the carefully planned community. Birds nested along the rooftops, their soft chirping carrying through the still air. Everything looked idyllic on the surface, perfectly curated and controlled, almost too perfect. But beneath that charming exterior lived a tension that simmered quietly, shaped by the homeowners, their small rivalries, and the unspoken competition over whose property appeared the most impressive. For the homeowner at the center of this tale, that morning started out no different than any other. He stepped outside with a cup of coffee, thinking only of the small maintenance tasks he wanted to handle before the afternoon heat settled in. But something in his peripheral vision stopped him before he even reached the end of his driveway. A shape where no shape should have been. A line where no line used to exist. The fence. A tall, newly installed wooden fence stretched across the boundary, separating his home from his neighbors. Not just on her side of the property line, but well into his. The posts were firmly planted, the panels freshly secured, and which still smelled of cut lumber and varnish. It stood there like a declaration, bold and unapologetic. That fence marked the beginning of a conflict he hadn't chosen, but would soon become deeply entangled in. The neighbor responsible for the sudden construction was a woman known throughout the community for her relentless pursuit of perfection and her even more relentless scrutiny of others. People had begun referring to her as Karen long before the term became a cultural shorthand for entitled behavior. With her meticulously maintained garden, her constant complaints to the HOA, and her habit of monitoring everyone's yard from behind her window blinds, she had built a reputation that was equal parts fearsome and exhausting. Seeing the fence wasn't just surprising, it was invasive. The homeowner walked the boundary, retracing the invisible line he had known for years. There was no mistaking it. The fence cut into his land by several feet, swallowing a strip of his property as if it had always belonged to someone else. The realization settled in slowly at first, then sharpened with each step he took. She had built her fence on his land. The next few hours were filled with quiet frustration as he tried to understand what had compelled her to take such a bold step. The thoughts circled in his mind. Perhaps it was a mistake. Perhaps she misread the property markers. Or perhaps, and this felt far more likely, it was intentional. Karen was known for pushing boundaries, literally and figuratively. She exerted influence over her surroundings, her neighbors, and whenever possible, the HOA. A fence on his land felt like the next logical step for someone who believed everything should exist according to her standards. He spent the day reviewing his property documents, digging through old records, and checking the original survey papers. Every measurement confirmed the same thing. The fence was resting squarely on his land. It was not even a close call. The encroachment was significant and unmistakable. As the hours passed, he found himself replaying the moment again and again, walking outside, expecting normalcy, only to find a structure that didn't belong. His coffee had grown cold long before he noticed. The calm of the morning had faded, replaced by a slow-burning frustration that grew sharper with time. He considered his options carefully. He was not someone who enjoyed conflict, nor did he seek it out, but he believed in fairness and boundaries, principles that made neighborhoods function smoothly. And now those principles had been violated. It wasn't just about the land itself. It was about respect, responsibility, and the understanding that people couldn't simply take what wasn't theirs. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the neat lawns and quiet streets, he finally formulated a plan. It wasn't a plan born out of anger, but out of practicality. He would approach the situation calmly, gather the facts, and give Karen a chance to correct her mistake. It seemed like the simplest and most reasonable path forward. But deep down, something gnawed at him, a quiet warning that things wouldn't resolve as easily as he hoped. Karen was not known for admitting fault, and she certainly wasn't known for compromising. If she had placed that fence there deliberately, then removing it might require far more than a friendly conversation. Still, he prepared for the next steps, knowing that ignoring the fence would set a precedent that he couldn't allow. Night fell slowly, the cool breeze carrying with it the scent of fresh wood from a newly built fence. The soft glow of streetlights illuminated the wooden panels, giving them an almost imposing presence in the quiet darkness. He went to sleep with a sense of unease, not fully aware of how far this conflict would escalate or how creative he would eventually need to become. What began as an overstep, a literal one, would soon grow into a battle of stubbornness, strategy, and unexpected consequences. And somewhere beneath that surface tension, beneath the frustration and the uncertainty, a spark of inspiration was waiting. A spark that would soon ignite into a plan so outrageous, so disruptive, that it would change the neighborhood forever. But for now, the fence stood silently in the night, marking the beginning of a problem that was only getting started. The following weeks unfolded like a slow-moving storm, the kind that builds quietly on the horizon before rolling in with a destructive force. The fence Karen had built, bold, bright, and unmistakably on the wrong side of the property line, became her badge of entitlement. What should have been a simple boundary dispute transformed into an escalating turf war, fueled by her relentless insistence that she was right and everyone else was wrong. From the outside, her backyard looked like a suburban display of order and pride. Perfect flower beds, obsessively trimmed shrubs, and solar garden lights spaced with military precision. But for the homeowner, the view had changed dramatically. Now, when he stepped outside, he was greeted not by open space, but by an aggressive wall of wooden panels towering over the boundary he legally owned. It wasn't just a fence. It was a message, a declaration of control. Karen treated her invasion as though it were an achievement. She strutted around her yard like a general surveying newly conquered land. She even hung decorative lanterns on the fence, making it feel even more permanent. Every addition she made seemed carefully crafted to irritate the very person whose land she had stolen. It wasn't long before the situation began attracting attention. Neighbors were divided. Some shook their heads quietly, aware of Karen's history of self-righteous behavior. Others avoided getting involved, unwilling to be the target of her temper. But a few actually encouraged her, telling her that property lines are flexible and that if he really cared, he would have stopped you sooner. These whispers only fueled her confidence, transforming a simple boundary error into a neighborhood spectacle. Meanwhile, the homeowner documented everything. Measurements, photos, timestamps. Each detail was stored carefully. He knew the law was on his side, but experience had taught him that common sense doesn't always prevail when emotion enters the picture. He needed proof, and he needed patience. Karen was the type who thrived on conflict, and any attempt to reason with her would only dig her deeper into the fantasy she constructed. His calmness infuriated her. She expected a fight, expected shouting, threats, or at least visible frustration. But instead, he remained steady, disciplined, and purposeful. Every time she caught him measuring or photographing the fence, she grew more agitated. She paced, glared, and muttered under her breath, convinced he was planning some dramatic retaliation. And, in a way, she wasn't wrong. He was planning something. Just not the kind of retaliation she could predict. Behind the scenes, he had begun exploring his options. Attorneys, surveyors, zoning officials, everyone confirmed the same thing. The land was unquestionably his. If he wanted, he could force Karen to remove the fence at her own expense. He could take her to court and win easily. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that forcing her compliance wouldn't solve the root problem. Karen wasn't just disrespectful. She was defiant by nature. Removing the fence today wouldn't stop the next boundary issue or the next confrontation she might invent. He needed a solution that would put a permanent end to the pattern. Something final. Something she could not manipulate, twist, or deny. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. A bigger idea. One that would not only reclaim the land, but ensure Karen could never intrude on it again. Before he could move forward, though, things escalated. Karen began hosting afternoon gatherings in her yard. Groups of neighbors tightly packed around lawn chairs as she retold the story of her fence like a hero defending her territory. Every retelling became more dramatic. In her version, she depicted the homeowner as unreasonable, petty, and aggressive, even though he had said nothing to her directly. These gatherings grew louder over time. The sound carried over the fence, filling his yard with distorted versions of events and self-righteous commentary. At night, the lights she had hung on the fence cast a bright glow across the property line, as though mocking him. Her message was clear. She had taken control, and she believed she had already won. But she had no idea what was coming. As summer pushed on, the homeowner sent an official notice requesting the fence be removed within 30 days. He expected resistance, but Karen reacted with outright hostility. She marched the paper around the neighborhood, treating it like an attack. She even pinned it to the fence as a public display, as if humiliating him would strengthen her position. The deadline passed with no action. Not a single board had been moved. Instead, Karen doubled down, planting new flowers along the base and painting decorative patterns across the panels. It was the clearest message she could send. She wasn't going to comply, but her defiance only confirmed that the homeowner needed to act. And not with court filings, but with something much bigger. As the days rolled forward, he finalized his research. He weighed options, spoke with companies, and confirmed permits. The fence Karen had treated as her triumph would soon become her greatest mistake. A mistake so monumental that the entire neighborhood would talk about it for years. Karen thought she had control, but she was about to learn what it looked like when someone responded not with anger, but with strategy. And as the homeowner received one final confirmation email, one that would change everything, the path forward became clear. The turning point began quietly, without confrontation, without warnings, and without the dramatic scenes Karen always expected. It began with a simple drive to an office on the outskirts of town, tucked between industrial buildings and warehouses. A company with a reputation for moving fast, paying well, and transforming even the smallest parcel of land into a glowing, towering advertisement. A billboard company. The homeowner stepped inside their headquarters with a folder full of measurements, surveys, and property documents. He had rehearsed how he would explain the situation, but as soon as he sat down with the representative, he realized he didn't need to justify anything. The company's interest in his land had nothing to do with Karen or her fence. It had everything to do with location, visibility, and foot traffic. The representative explained that his land, particularly the strip where the fence sat, was part of a highly desirable sightline for anyone driving through the neighborhood. A large LED billboard placed there would command constant attention, especially at night. It was, financially speaking, a gold mine. What the homeowner had endured as an inconvenience, the company saw as potential. The meeting unfolded with surprising ease. They discussed dimensions, installation logistics, and the height needed for maximum visibility. They reviewed zoning regulations to ensure compliance. Every step seemed to confirm the same truth. This plan could work and work well. By the time he walked out of the office, he held a preliminary agreement in his hands, a document outlining terms, payments, and next steps. For the first time since the fence appeared, he felt genuine relief. Karen had tried to force a boundary violation, but instead, she had indirectly created something that would benefit him long-term. The more he thought about it, the more ironic it became. She had fought to gain control of a few feet of land, and now that same land was about to transform her peaceful garden into the brightest spot in the neighborhood. Weeks passed as the legal and logistical details were finalized. Surveyors arrived to mark the exact boundaries and confirm placement. Contractors visited to inspect soil conditions. Engineers analyzed the height, angle, and lighting necessary to meet regulations. Each visit stirred curiosity among the neighbors, but Karen viewed them with suspicion. She hovered around her yard, arms crossed, demanding answers from anyone who got too close to her fence. But no one told her anything. She wasn't the landowner. Her fence wasn't on her property. And every professional who stepped foot there had only one client to answer to, the homeowner. As paperwork progressed, something else became increasingly clear. Karen had no idea what was coming. She continued maintaining her garden with obsessive enthusiasm, pruning and rearranging as though preparing for some imaginary neighborhood award. Her confidence had reached its peak. She believed the lack of immediate legal retaliation meant she had won the dispute. To her, the absence of confrontation meant surrender. But the homeowner had never planned to fight loudly. He planned to fight effectively. Once the deal was officially signed, the company moved quickly. They submitted permit requests, which were approved without resistance. After all, everything complied with zoning laws. The homeowner watched each step unfold with a quiet satisfaction. Years from now, he knew this decision would still be paying off financially and personally. It wasn't just revenge. It was strategy. Finally, the installation date was set. The homeowner received the finalized schedule, the equipment list, and the projected size of the LED billboard. It was massive, far more impressive than he had imagined. The structure would rise high enough to be seen from multiple angles, and the lighting would remain active at all hours. The company described it as a premium high-visibility unit. Karen would eventually describe it as the ruin of her life. As the day approached, Karen grew increasingly restless. Trucks had been seen driving through the neighborhood. Construction supplies were being stored temporarily at the edge of the street. Something was coming, something big, but she had no clue what it was. Her demeanor shifted noticeably. The smugness that once defined her behavior slowly turned into suspicion. She peered out her windows more frequently. She stood close to the fence whenever contractors walked by, trying desperately to gather information. But they had been instructed to avoid discussions with anyone other than the homeowner. And so, every day she found herself more isolated from the truth, trapped in a story she believed she controlled. On the morning of installation, a caravan of trucks rolled into the neighborhood. Heavy equipment, cranes, metal frames, electrical wiring, and large wooden crates filled with LED panels. The noise echoed through the street. Neighbors stepped outside to watch. Karen stormed into her yard, furious and demanding answers, but contractors ignored her entirely. They weren't there for her. They weren't working on her land. They weren't required to explain anything. The homeowner stood calmly at a distance, watching the first pieces of the towering frame being unloaded. The project was finally becoming real. The land Karen had tried to claim was about to transform before everyone's eyes. The first bolts were drilled into the ground, the concrete foundation prepared, the steel support beams assembled. As the structure began to rise over Karen's illegal fence, her rage escalated. She called out to workers, paced around her garden, and waved her arms frantically. But no one acknowledged her, not because they were rude, but because she had no authority whatsoever. With each passing hour, the billboard rose higher and higher. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. Some laughed quietly. Others recorded videos. Karen's pristine garden, once a symbol of pride, now sat directly beneath the growing shadow of a massive LED tower. And yet, the most shocking part was still to come, the lighting test. But that would happen after sundown. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the street lights flickered on, Karen stood by the fence, staring up at the structure with a mixture of dread and denial. She still didn't know what the billboard would display. She still didn't understand the magnitude of the situation. But she was about to find out. The installation crew worked until the final moments of daylight, making sure every bolt, panel, and frame piece was perfectly secured. By the time the last of the equipment was packed away, the towering LED billboard stood fully assembled, a colossal structure that dominated the entire side of the street. Its presence alone shifted the atmosphere of the neighborhood. Even unlit, it loomed like a silent warning. Karen hovered beneath it, pacing back and forth with growing agitation. Her garden, once the centerpiece of her pride, looked suddenly vulnerable beneath the steel giant. The illegal fence that had sparked the entire conflict now seemed pitifully small compared to the monument rising above it. But despite her obvious anxiety, she still clung to the belief that the structure couldn't possibly be permanent. She had convinced herself that the HOA would intervene, that the city would shut it down, that something, anything, would save her from whatever was coming. But as night settled in, her confidence began to crack. The homeowner sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in hand, waiting for the moment he knew was approaching. The billboard company had scheduled the first lighting test for 8 p.m. sharp. It would be brief but unmistakable, and it would change the entire tone of the neighborhood. At precisely 7:59, several service vans arrived. Technicians in reflective vests exited with equipment and laptops, speaking quietly as they made their final preparations. Karen stormed out of her house, gesturing wildly, trying to insert herself into whatever conversation she could overhear. But once again, she was met with the same indifference. Their focus was on the structure, the wiring, the programming, not her outrage. Neighbors began gathering along the sidewalks, some casually watching from their porches, others recording with their phones. A sense of anticipation filled the air. Everyone had been speculating for days, but now they were moments away from seeing the truth. Even those who sympathized with neither side couldn't help but be curious. Then the countdown began. The technicians initiated the system boot-up sequence. The dark screen flickered briefly, humming with electrical life. A low, growing glow seeped to the edges of each LED panel. And finally, with a burst of vibrant illumination, the billboard roared to life. The light was instantaneous and overwhelming, an explosion of color that washed across Karen's yard like a wave. It reflected off her fence, her windows, her garden ornaments, and every inch of her once peaceful landscape. The brightness pierced the night, transforming her yard into something resembling a commercial plaza rather than a private home. Her garden, carefully curated and obsessively maintained, was no longer a quiet sanctuary. It was now the stage for advertisements that would run day and night, shifting colors and intensity, each transition more intrusive than the last. The first test display wasn't an actual advertisement. It was a rotating series of calibration screens. Solid red, solid blue, solid green, a blinding white, a pulsing gradient of colors. Each a dagger into the serenity she had stolen for herself. The moment the lights ignited, Karen froze in disbelief. Her entire body stiffened. The expression on her face, shock, horror, betrayal, was so intense that even neighbors who had been rooting for her downfall felt a fleeting moment of sympathy before remembering everything she had caused. As the billboard continued its test cycles, everything Karen had taken for granted began unraveling in real time. The soft glow of her patio lanterns was no longer visible under the flood of LED brightness. The shadows cast by her neatly trimmed shrubs stretched unnaturally in every direction. The insects that had once danced around her garden lights scattered, confused. And the quiet, nighttime ambience of the neighborhood shattered under the mechanical hum of the illuminated structure. But this was only the beginning. After the first calibration phase, the billboard switched to its default demonstration mode. High-resolution images flashed across the screen, each brighter than the last. A sports drink ad, a local business promotion, a vacation package slideshow, animated transitions, motion graphics. Each new display lit up not just her yard, but the entire street. Karen stumbled backward, overwhelmed. She retreated to the farthest corner of her garden, as though distance could save her from the illumination. But no matter where she moved, the light followed. Her perfect roses were bathed in neon. Her lawn ornaments gleamed with unwanted brilliance. Her patio cushions glowed unnaturally, washing out their colors beneath the LED shine. For the homeowner watching from his porch, it was a moment of quiet satisfaction, not derived from cruelty, but from justice. She had crossed boundaries. Literally, she had taken land that didn't belong to her, refused to correct her mistake, and taunted him for months. Now, the universe had simply corrected the imbalance in a way she never saw coming. The crowd watching the spectacle exchanged whispers. Some found it hilarious. Others found it shocking. But regardless of their personal opinions, everyone recognized the same truth. Nothing would ever be the same for Karen. When the lighting test finally concluded, the technicians gathered their equipment and departed. The billboard dimmed only slightly, switching to a low brightness holding display, still far brighter than anything that had ever illuminated the neighborhood before. Karen stayed outside long after the workers left, staring up at the glowing tower as if trying to will it out of existence. But it didn't budge. It didn't flicker. It didn't waver. It simply hummed quietly above her yard, a constant reminder of the consequences she had brought on herself. Meanwhile, the homeowner returned inside, confident that the next phase of drama would unfold naturally. After all, Karen had just witnessed only the first night. The reality of the situation had not fully sunk in yet. The complaints, the outrage, the desperation, those were still to come. Because the billboard wasn't temporary. It wasn't occasional. It was forever. The next morning arrived not with the usual calmness of the neighborhood, but with a tension thick enough to feel from the sidewalk. The billboard, still glowing from its overnight schedule, cast a soft but unmistakable light across the yards as the sun slowly rose. Even in daylight, Its presence was undeniable, a towering monument of steel and screens that altered everything in its shadow. Karen hadn't slept. Her lights had remained on through the night in a futile attempt to compete with the glow radiating across her bedroom. The billboard's illumination seeped through every crack, bypassing blinds and curtains, softening none of its intensity. By dawn, she looked as though she had aged 5 years in a single night. Exhaustion clung to her face, and frustration simmered beneath her every breath. And that was when the war began. Her first move was to contact the HOA. She marched into their office, armed with photos, screenshots, handwritten complaints, and a fury so palpable that even the receptionist leaned backward in her chair. She demanded immediate action. She claimed it violated the community's aesthetic, property value, peace, and environmental harmony. But the HOA, despite their usual enthusiasm for micromanagement, had no jurisdiction over the property. The billboard sat entirely on privately owned land, legally permitted, properly installed, and entirely out of their reach. The HOA president reviewed the documentation quietly, and for the first time, Karen saw a reflection of helplessness on someone else's face. There was nothing they could do. The homeowner had not broken a single rule. He had simply used his land in a way that the law fully supported. The HOA might have an opinion, but they had no authority. Her disappointment quickly transformed into panic. With the HOA unable to intervene, she redirected her energy toward the city. She filed noise complaints, light disturbance claims, environmental impact objections, and even attempted to argue that the billboard was a public safety hazard because of its brightness. Each department responded with the same conclusion. Everything was legal. The permits had been approved. Regulations had been followed. There was no violation. Every door she knocked on led to the same dead end. And as she fought, the billboard continued its relentless cycle of advertisements. Throughout the day, the LED screens displayed promotions for local businesses, bright graphics, animated motions, and bold text that reflected across her entire yard. It illuminated her garden like a stage, making her once tranquil space feel like the lobby of a bustling mall. By evening, the brightness returned to full power, and Karen's desperation turned into hysteria. The neighborhood couldn't help but notice. While some people sympathized with her, many others saw it as poetic justice. Karen had built her fence illegally. She had refused to move it. In her arrogance, she believed she controlled the outcome, and now she faced a consequence she never imagined. The irony was not lost on anyone. Her next attempt was more aggressive. She contacted a lawyer, hoping to find a loophole that could force the removal of the billboard. The lawyer reviewed the case carefully, but after sifting through permits, deeds, surveys, and regulations, he delivered the same verdict. Nothing illegal had occurred. The landowner had every right to sell the strip of property, and the billboard company had every right to build. Karen's frustration exploded into anger. She demanded the lawyer find anything, any tiny detail, that could be used to challenge the installation. But the lawyer refused to pursue a baseless claim and stepped away from the case entirely. She was on her own. Her sleeplessness continued. Each night, the billboard illuminated every corner of her home, and each morning she woke up feeling more unhinged. The glowing light reflected in her windows like a permanent sunrise that never faded. Even her beloved garden changed under the billboard's presence. The plants that once thrived in gentle shade now glowed with unnatural hues. Decorative ornaments cast long, distorted shadows that gave the entire yard an eerie appearance after dark. Her irritation began to seep into her daily life. She snapped at neighbors. She yelled at passing cars. She confronted delivery drivers and landscapers as though they were responsible. Her voice, once firm and demanding, now cracked under the weight of her own unraveling. Meanwhile, the homeowner remained quiet. There was nothing more for him to do. The land transaction was complete. The billboard was permanent. The consequences were unfolding naturally, without any further involvement from him. Watching Karen spiral was not something he saw for entertainment. It was simply the final chapter of a conflict she had created. But Karen did not accept defeat. Not yet. In a final attempt to reclaim her sense of control, she resorted to organizing a neighborhood petition. She went door to door with clipboards and signature sheets, try to gather support to demand the billboard's removal. Some neighbors listened politely but refused to sign. Others avoided the door altogether. A few gave her false promises just to avoid the conversation. She collected far fewer signatures than she expected. Her tone became increasingly frantic. She insisted the billboard was destroying property values, ruining sleep schedules, and damaging the neighborhood's reputation. But her argument held little weight when everyone knew the origin of the conflict: her fence, her refusal, her arrogance. The petition eventually reached the city council, but as expected, it was dismissed without review. Karen broke down outside the building, overwhelmed by the realization that every avenue she tried had hit the same impenetrable wall. She had no authority. She had no leverage. And most importantly, she had no legal standing. Days later, the billboard company initiated the final phase of their rollout, a rotation of bright, high-resolution, citywide advertisements, including nighttime animations designed to catch attention from blocks away. When the first full night cycle activated, the colors danced across Karen's home like fireworks. Her once quiet evenings were now bathed in pulsating light. It was the moment she finally understood the permanence of her situation, and the moment her rage shifted into something darker, because Karen wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The constant glow of the billboard had begun to wear down the very structure of Karen's life. Her sleep came in fragments. Her meals were rushed and joyless, and her obsessive routine of tending to her garden had become a chore she performed only out of habit. Her prized roses, once her greatest pride, now looked dull beneath the glare of shifting advertisements. The colors never looked the same twice. The petals seemed unnaturally tinted depending on whatever had illuminated them at the moment. What had once been her sanctuary had transformed into a stage she never asked for, a place not of peace, but of constant reminder. A reminder that she no longer controlled anything, not her fence, not her yard, and not the outcome of the conflict she ignited. The neighborhood watched Karen spiral with cautious curiosity. Some found it tragic. Others believed it was deserved. But everyone would remember how the climax unfolded. Karen's final attempt to reclaim her power took form late one night, long after the neighborhoods had settled into silence. The billboard hummed softly, casting a sweeping glow across her home. That light, which she had grown to resent more than anything, followed her with every step as she made her way to the fence line. She walked with the slow, determined rhythm of someone who convinced herself she had nothing left to lose. She had decided that if no authority would remove the billboard for her, then she would take matters into her own hands. Clutched in her hand was a small garden tool. Nothing impressive, nothing capable of doing real structural damage, but in her exhausted state, she believed it might somehow be enough. Her plan was impulsive, desperate, and fundamentally flawed. She approached the base of the billboard like a person approaching a personal enemy. The steel frame towered above her, indifferent to her rage, its surface reflecting a soft glow that made her appear even smaller. She reached out and struck the metal with the tool. The sound was sharp and pointless. The tool bounced. The metal didn't even dent. She tried again, harder this time. The result was identical. The billboard, built to withstand storms, winds, and years of wear, was completely unaffected. But Karen was determined. Strike after strike. She swung the tool until her arm grew weak, her breath grew unsteady, and her resolve began to collapse beneath the weight of futility. By the time she stopped, her exhaustion had reached its peak. She leaned against the fence. Her fence, the one she had fought so hard to keep, as though it could hold the weight of her failure. But it didn't. In her fatigue, she slipped, lost her balance, and the fence wobbled beneath her weight. One portion caved slightly inward, revealing cracks she had ignored for too long. That small collapse symbolized what had happened to everything she tried to control. The noise of her attempted sabotage did not go unnoticed. Within minutes, a neighbor who had been awake late noticed a commotion and made a quick call to non-emergency services. When officers arrived, they found Karen sitting on the ground, the garden tool beside her, staring blankly at the billboard. Her anger had drained completely, leaving only the hollow weight of defeat. The officer spoke calmly, urging her to return inside. They noted the absence of real damage, recognizing the situation as more of an emotional outburst than a criminal act. They escorted her back to her property, advising her to rest and avoid further escalation. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Karen stayed inside, curtains drawn, daylight blocked. She didn't step outside to water her plants. She didn't patrol her fence line. She didn't confront passersby. She simply vanished behind her walls, leaving her garden unattended for the first time in years. The roses sagged. The yard grew quiet. Even the birds seemed to sense a shift. The homeowner watched from a distance, not with gloating satisfaction, but with a quiet acknowledgement that everything had come full circle. He hadn't set out to destroy Karen's peace. He had simply refused to allow her to destroy his. Her downfall had been her own doing, from the moment she built her fence on his land to the moment she refused to move it. Life settled into a strange equilibrium over the next weeks. The billboard continued its cycle. The advertisements changed with the seasons. The neighborhood adjusted to the glow. And Karen, whether out of shame or exhaustion, maintained her isolation. One morning, weeks after the incident, something unexpected happened. Karen's house went up for sale. The sign appeared quietly, without fanfare. A simple post in the front yard announcing that the property was officially on the market. It was the only solution left for her, a chance to escape the glow that followed her every night, and a chance to leave behind the consequences she had created. Neighbors speculated privately, but no one questioned the decision. It made sense. Her chapter in the neighborhood was closing. Within a few months, a new family moved in. Friendly, quiet, and uninterested in drama. The fence was removed almost immediately, not by demand, but by choice. They wanted an open yard, free from barriers. They didn't mind the billboard. In fact, they joked that it provided enough light to save on electricity at night. And so the land healed. The conflict faded. The neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. As for the homeowner, he continued living peacefully, enjoying the financial benefits of the land deal and grateful for the calm that returned to his life. He often passed by the billboard, watching the changing advertisements, each one a subtle reminder that boundaries and consequences matter. He never gloated. He never bragged. He simply appreciated the quiet justice of it all. And the billboard continued shining, standing tall over the place where a needless conflict once cast its own shadow.